So let's just dive right into this explainer. Right now, if you were to pour yourself a glass of wine or crack open a cold beer, you probably wouldn't think twice about it. You'd just sip it and go about your day. But what you're actually doing is participating in one of the oldest behaviors on planet Earth. I mean, it's older than writing, it's older than farming, and incredibly, it predates human beings entirely. Our relationship with alcohol doesn't just start a few thousand years ago with the first brewery, it actually goes way, way back, about 10 million years back, to a forest floor in Africa.
Our story starts 10 million years ago, with primates eating overripe, naturally fermenting fruit. Back in 2014, a UC Berkeley biologist named Robert Dudley published a book detailing what he called the drunken monkey hypothesis. And his argument is just fascinatingly simple. When fruit falls from a tree and sits on the ground for too long, it changes. And when our early primate ancestors ate that fallen fruit, the tiny amounts of ethanol inside it made them feel, well, a little drunk. They had absolutely no idea why it was happening, but the ethanol made them feel good, so they kept coming back for more.
This taste for alcohol just built up naturally in the wild. It's a completely automatic process. The fruit falls, the natural sugars start to break down, wild yeast enters the picture, and boom, fermentation creates ethanol. Because this provided a really reliable food source that also just so happened to feel great, our ancestors actually evolved to actively look for it. By the time early humans even showed up on the evolutionary timeline, the taste for alcohol was already hardwired right into our biology. The desire was there long before we ever existed, let alone figured out how to make this stuff on purpose.
So that brings us to the obvious question. When did we figure out how to make it on purpose? Fast forward to 2018. Archaeologists were excavating a site near Haifa, Israel, and they made an absolutely staggering discovery about early human behavior. They were digging in Rakafet Cave, which was a site used by a group known as the Natufian people, right around 13,000 years ago. And what they uncovered in the dark of that cave? It completely rewrote the timeline of human ingenuity.
Archaeologists discovered these stone mortars that were carved directly into the bedrock of the cave itself. And when scientists analyzed the residue left inside those ancient mortars, they found traces of wheat that had been intentionally soaked and germinated, right alongside the residue of fermented barley. Make no mistake about what this is. This is beer, deliberately brewed in a cave 13,000 years ago.
But here's the real kicker. The Natufians were not farmers. They hadn't even invented agriculture yet. They were nomadic hunter-gatherers, still hunting for meat and collecting wild grain by hand. They didn't grow the barley and wheat they used. They had to forage for it. This totally upends the old accepted assumption that humans settled down, built villages, learned to farm, and only then discovered fermentation. Making beer was somehow so absolutely crucial to them that they figured out the entire brewing process while constantly on the move.
This forces us to ask a massive question, one that totally changes how we view human history. Were nomadic humans prioritizing beer before bread? The traditional story always says alcohol was a byproduct of civilization, but the evidence from Rakafet Cave suggests the exact opposite. These people were putting immense, painstaking effort into brewing beverages long before they ever planted a single field of crops. And they definitely weren't an isolated case. About 1,000 years later, over in southeastern Turkey, hunter-gatherers built something enormous that adds incredible weight to this whole mystery. At a site called Göbekli Tepe, dating back 12,000 years, ancient humans engaged in an architectural project that honestly shouldn't have been possible for nomadic people.
They arranged massive, intricately carved stone pillars in careful, deliberate circles. And some of these pillars weighed over 10 tons. Remember, this was built before farming, before pottery, and before anyone in the region had a permanent home. For years, archaeologists were just completely baffled. I mean, how do you organize the immense labor required to move 10-ton stones up a hill and carve them with such precision when your workforce is entirely made up of wandering hunter-gatherers? What could possibly motivate that level of coordination?
Well, the answer might just be alcohol. Archaeologists found large stone vats at the site. And when they actually tested the insides of these vats, they found chemical traces of fermented grain. They weren't just making small batches here. They were brewing enough from massive gatherings. Archaeologists realized this complex monument wasn't a permanent home at all. It was likely a central gathering place for nomadic people to travel from all across the region, come together, and drink beer in large quantities through ritual and feasting.
Now, if hunter-gatherers were doing all this heavy lifting, carving bedrock, moving 10-ton pillars, organizing massive regional feasts, just to drink together, it brings up an even bigger historical mystery. For decades, academics have debated why humans ever gave up the foraging lifestyle to endure the backbreaking labor of early agriculture. I mean, why did humans actually start farming in the first place? Patrick McGovern, who is an archaeobotanist and basically the world's leading expert on ancient alcohol, has spent decades arguing a fascinating point. He firmly believes humans didn't start farming to make bread, they started farming to make beer.
He suggests that the desire to drink and gather for these euphoric communal feasts was a much stronger motivator to cultivate grain than the desire to just eat that grain in a slightly different, solid form.
And when you look at the sheer difference in labor, McGovern's theory makes a lot of sense. Actually, bread making is highly complex. You have to mill and grind the grain into flour, make the dough, knead it, and maintain a hot oven for baking. Beer brewing, especially in its ancient form, is significantly simpler and a lot more natural. You basically just soak grain in water, leave it alone, and let the natural fermentation process do its thing. Beer is literally the easier path, meaning the pursuit of alcohol might be the exact reason we finally decided to settle down, plant fields, and build civilization.
As time went on and humans did settle down, our ancestors went from accidental fermentation to precise, deliberate mixology. By 7000 BCE, so about 9,000 years ago, the evidence of brewing gets incredibly specific at a Neolithic village called Jiahu in central China.
Archaeologists analyzing ancient pottery jars from this village discovered something absolutely amazing: the world's oldest confirmed alcohol recipe. Chemical analysis revealed a highly sophisticated fermented blend made of rice, honey, grapes, and hawthorn berries. This wasn't just some crude, accidental mush left out in the rain. This was a deliberate recipe with multiple ingredients carefully chosen and combined for flavor and effect. It proves that early humans absolutely knew what they were doing and were actively perfecting their craft.
From those early recipes, the scale of brewing only grew. By the time ancient Egypt arrived on the world stage about 5,000 years ago, beer wasn't just something people made for a fun weekend gathering. No, it was the literal engine of the entire civilization. It was woven into the fabric of everyday life in a way that is kind of hard for us to comprehend today.
4 to 5 liters. Now that wasn't a recommended daily water intake, that was the daily beer salary for the laborers who built the pyramids. Let that sink in. The workers dragging massive limestone blocks in the blistering desert heat weren't paid in coins, and they weren't just given raw grain. Their actual, contractual paycheck was 4 to 5 liters of beer every single day. Beer in Egypt was incredibly versatile. It was literally everything. It was a worker's salary. It acted as a water filter because the brewing process killed off bacteria, making it much safer to drink than the often contaminated water straight from the Nile. It served as a high-calorie lunch, providing essential nutrients and energy for grueling manual labor. Doctors would mix herbs into it and prescribe it as medicine for infections. And spiritually, it was considered a divine gift from the god Osiris, used constantly as a religious offering. One single drink was serving as a paycheck, a water filter, a meal, a medicine, and a prayer, all from the exact same cup.
When we look back across this vast timeline, it's just incredible to see the full picture come together. We see an unbroken chain connecting us through deep time. 10 million years ago, primates sought out fermented fruit on the forest floor. 13,000 years ago, nomads were deliberately brewing in the bedrock of Rakafet Cave. 12,000 years ago, we were likely building the very first monuments in human history at Göbekli Tepe, just to have a place to drink together. 9,000 years ago, we were perfecting complex recipes in Jiha. And 5,000 years ago, entire empires like Egypt were quite literally running on beer.
The overarching narrative we usually learn in school is backwards. Alcohol didn't come after we built the world we live in. There is a very real, scientifically backed possibility that it's the reason we built it at all. Over millions of years, the process changed, our understanding deepened, the ingredients improved, and, well, the cups certainly got a lot fancier. But that fundamental biological impulse, it remained exactly the same throughout all of history.
So I'll leave you with this provocative thought to ponder the next time you raise a glass with friends. Are you just enjoying a beverage, or are you actively continuing a 10 million-year-old evolutionary impulse that literally built human civilization? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. If you want to dig deeper into the science and history behind these incredible sources, be sure to check the links in the description below.